Hi everybody, welcome back to episode 40 of the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm currently multitasking at the moment. I'm uploading files to drives and bits and bobs to YouTube, so I'm hoping it's not going to affect the quality of the show, but I'm really pressed for time today and I've got a lot of stuff going on, so I need to create space because my startup disk is just at the end of its tether. Literally hates me. I don't think that my laptop is up to the job of doing what I do with it, so I'm going to have to invest in something a little bit better when I get a little bit of spare cash. I'm Stephanie James, by the way, if you're just tuning in for the first time and wondering who the hell this is moaning about their laptop. And I am an astrologer. I used to write for Elle magazine. I used to write a horoscope column for Elle magazine, as well as a number of other publications. And I currently am a tutor at the London School of Astrology. I teach a few classes there. If you go to their distance learning curriculum, you'll find some of my classes there. And I am also the founder of StelliumAstrology.com and, of course, the host of this podcast. So today we're basically halfway through the houses. We are now on the 4th and 10th house, and the reason I decided to do it in a kind of do two houses at a time is because the houses and the signs all seem to work as a kind of polarity. So it's interesting to look at them in this way. We could do a walkthrough of each of the houses, but and do it one by one, and that's perfectly good. You can do it that way, but I don't know why, I just fancied doing it this way. So we've reached 4 and 10. And if you are looking at the wheel of the horoscope, which basically looks a bit like a hot cross bun, we've reached the line that goes from the top to the bottom, not left to right. We started at left to right, and now we're at the top and bottom line. So we've literally we've made the cross. We've made the hot cross bun. So before I go on with that, I just wanted to remind you guys that I have a Patreon page. I'm regularly making videos and content for that page. There's also downloads there. I'm constantly putting stuff on there. Some of it's free that you can access without being a patron. Some of it is patron only content. I am getting round to, I've been interviewing a few of my astrology colleagues, my astro buddies, so that there will be interviews coming up on this podcast, and the part 2s of these interviews are going to be going out on this podcast, on the Patreon page. There's a link to the Patreon page at the bottom in the description, and it's another place where you can get additional content, and I'm hoping that all of the explanations that go on here on the podcast are actually going to help to develop your understanding of astrology if you need that. Or if you're just enjoying listening to somebody waffle about astrology, that's cool too. But hoping that, it'll enrich your understanding in some way or another. And that actually when you want to sort of explore the subject in a deeper way, you have the kind of the tools, the equipment in order to do so. So, I'm also, just FYI, readings are getting a bit scarce at the moment. I'm really running out of time. So if you were thinking of booking in with me, I would urge you to do it relatively soon before they all get booked up. So I suppose we really should just get on with the show, really, shouldn't we? So I just wanted to do a shout out. Can't remember if I did last week, but I'll do a shout out for Ursula, who contacted me. We'll be looking at your chart in a few shows' time. So hi Ursula, thanks for getting in touch. I think I met Ursula on a Facebook group, and she got in touch with me privately, and we just got talking. So it's nice. I enjoy mingling on Facebook groups that aren't my own groups. It's always fun to sort of get involved, especially if they're quite controversial and there's people saying, like, rather condemning things about people's planetary placements. I always have to get involved and just say, I don't think that that's right. But, whatever. I'm not like the gospel on astrology. I have my opinions. I'm not trying to argue with people. I'm just trying to think about the poor person on the receiving end saying, oh my gosh, I've just noticed I've got this. The other day it was, I've got Chiron. I've got Jupiter and Chiron in my 7th house in Cancer. Will I ever meet somebody? And somebody was like, nope, relationships will always be a source of pain for you and you will be alone. And I thought, what kind of advice is that to somebody? It's so stupid. Yeah, you're going to have like heartbreak in relationships. There will be some painful ones, but who doesn't have that in a relationship? Um, you know, Chiron is a difficult placement in the chart, and I guess we should do a show on Chiron at some point. I'm trying to find somebody who's more of an expert than I am to come and talk to you guys about Chiron. But why would you say that to somebody? Why would you say, oh no, you're condemned to a life of being lonely, and if you ever get in a relationship, it's going to be, just really painful? There's just so much more you can look at in the chart than just focusing on one asteroid and fixating on it, and then like not psychologically, subconsciously sabotaging yourself in relationships to come because you're kind of looking for experiences that confirm that belief that you have about your relationship, which I think is the one of the downsides of astrology. I think you can make assumptions about yourself and then think that you have to play this kind of become a parody of the planetary placements in your chart based on the understanding you have of those planets, rather than allowing yourself to just be and allowing yourself to just enable those placements to play out in your life and observe them from a removed perspective. Spoken like somebody with Mercury in Aquarius, I know. Yes, I do have that kind of ability to watch and experience life on almost I don't want to say scientific level, but definitely a removed perspective. I don't have to be involved to be watching. I'm a people watcher. Probably why I'm so into astrology, because I just love looking at people's charts and understanding how it works for them. But please don't be put off by any placements that you think might condemn you to something. Like a Venus-Saturn square, somebody who'll never have any money. I have a Venus-Saturn square. It's not the only financial indicator in your natal chart to start with. In fact, if anything, it promotes hard work and a good sort of work ethic, I would say. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have any money. But that was another one in a group. There's just so many silly things. But anyway, I'm going off on a waffle here again. I'm digressing. Let's pull it back to the 4th and 10th house. Now, the 4th house is the lowest point in the chart. So I'm kind of doing this based on equal house system. Had a really interesting discussion with astrologer Wade Caves the other day about house systems, and he really went into the astronomy of house systems. That is going to be Patreon only content on the Patreon page. That will be going up at some point over the next probably few months. I'm not sure exactly when it's going up, but I'm just building up a few bits and bobs. But it will be early release to the patrons actually, it is exclusive content. Just that particular part 2 of the interview I had with him, where he goes into the house systems in much greater detail, is very interesting. But just for argument's sake, we're going through the equal house system, but we can talk about the 4th house and the 10th house cusp, regardless of which house system we're using. And now the IC is the point in the chart which is probably the lowest part of the heavens. The IC stands for Immum Coeli, or it sort of looks like it's spelled Immum Coeli, and that is I think it is Latin for the lowest heavens or the lower heavens. And directly opposite that, which is on the cusp of the 10th house, is the midheaven, which is signified usually by the letters MC, meaning medium coeli. And the medium coeli is, the highest part of the heavens. If you've got sun around the IC, then usually it indicates that you're born around midnight. And if you've got sun around the MC, it's quite dependent on where you are in the world, because obviously the MC and the IC, just like the ascendant and descendant, are time and location sensitive. And if you're closer to the equator, you're going to have much more even days and nights. Whereas if you're in the northern or southern hemisphere, quite north or south, like the UK, in the winter sometimes, we have much longer nights and much shorter days. Therefore, that affects the placement of the midheaven, because the sort of central part of the day is not necessarily going to be noon, especially in the summer. But anyway, without getting too bogged down with the astronomy of it all and the calculations of it all, wherever your MC and IC are in your chart, take that as the highest and the lowest parts of the heavens. Now, this actually is called the parental axis. And the reason why is because we have relationship axis in our chart. We have two relationship axes. We have the ascendant and descendant being the self and the other. But the other axes that we have is the IC and the MC, which is the parental axis, where we look towards our role models in a sense. Now, the IC, being the lowest point of the chart, is the kind of the root. It's where we come from. It signifies home life. It signifies us at our core. It's our psychological basement. And this part of the chart, the IC, there are many arguments over this, but generally the IC and the fourth house tend to indicate the fourth house definitely tends to indicate the father. Though some people might say, well, why doesn't it indicate the mother? If it's the root and where we've come from, if we're born, it signifies the mother. There are many people who argue over this, and there's not a really definitive answer. I think everybody's chart is personal to them. Some people don't have a mum and a dad at all. Some people have carers or guardians. Some people come from families where they have two male role models, and some have two female role models. It's unconventional family life. Is more and more conventional every day that goes by. So we can't be fixated on who it represents, but through discussion with our client or with the person's chart that you're reading, you'll usually identify who the significator is on that cusp or that fourth house area. Now, the fourth house generally seems to be attached to Cancer and the moon. And like I said, we've done shows on Cancer and the moon, so we've got an idea of what that means. And the fourth house, it echoes that. But instead of being about perhaps the family and the people involved in the family, it may indicate where the family is, your connection with the family, and just sort of, the kind of past you've had, the kind of upbringing you've had, and how connected you are to yourself, how connected you are to your roots. If you had Neptune down there on the IC, you might have a very difficult time connecting with your past, because it's not very clear. There's a lot of mystery involved in maybe who your parents are, or there may be some kind of, I guess, maybe a secret or something that just there's a lack of truth there, that kind of thing. Whereas you might have Uranus down there. It could be a family life where you were constantly moving around and you never had a chance to really grow any roots. So planets on the IC, on that MCIC axis, are really just as important as rising and setting planets as well. It's really, really telling of somebody if they've got planets sort of hanging around those axes. It really kind of powers those planets up. Obviously, the IC is below the horizon, because the horizon line being the ascendant and descendant, the horizontal line of our hot cross bun, is anything below that is a much more subconscious, much less showy part of who we are, much more concealed. Whether you do that intentionally or not, it's just not what people meet when they first meet you. Whereas above that horizontal hot cross bun line, the horizon, anything above that is much more on display and kind of a bit more what you see is what you get kind of thing. Anything up on the midheaven, any planets up on the midheaven will be really obvious or really out there for people to see. It will create a lot of interest in that area. So we've talked about the fourth house being a bit more Cancerian and lunar in its essence, though it does not mean that it is Cancer ruled and moon ruled. For example, I have Leo on my IC and I have Aquarius on my MC, which gives me a much more Leo story in my family life, though I still have those lunar Cancerian connections that you get with family. It's much more leonine in my experience. So that means I come from a really massive family. There's always some sort of drama going on. And I suppose deep down in the core of who I am, I have some Leo qualities which I kind of flex. I'm a guitarist, and I play various instruments, piano and guitar, mostly guitar. But I'm not a natural performer. I kind of keep my performance under wraps. I could perform, I could play in front of an audience, and I have done, but it's something that I like to keep to myself. I'm not that confident to do that. Whereas, I've got this podcast and stuff. So from home, when I'm working from home, I'm doing something which actually does puts me out there, puts my face out there. I've got my website. It's all very, I suppose I am using myself, my image, in order to connect with my audience. So there is a sense of performance about me, but it's not your sort of necessarily right out there for everybody to see Leo type thing. And with my Aquarius on my midheaven, this is where we get into the opposite of the home life area, and we get into the work life. So you might have the home and work life balance. Now, my midheaven in Aquarius means I'm going to be doing work, which is very much, it gives me the freedom to do what I want. It has to be, it's unique. It has to express my unique abilities and talents, and it's something that I do that is probably a bit quirky. Usually Aquarius is a bit quirky. Usually they are a little bit able to connect with concept over a typical run-of-the-mill kind of job where it's much more conceptual. So could be IT, could be good with computers if it's an Aquarius. It's just going to be different, and it's going to be different to what the rest of the family do, because when you've got a Leo Aquarius axis on the MCIC, then you've got somebody who is going to be doing things differently from the rest of the family. They're going to stand out and be a bit odd, or outside the box kind of thing. So that's just a Leo Aquarius. And like I said before, Leo is kind of like the performer, and Aquarius is kind of the audience. So, there is a sense of performance about that for me, about my MCIC axis, but it's flipped around. So my podcast, I like to make it, I do add my own personal anecdotes, but I also include stories where I can of other people. And I like to make the podcast about you guys and look at your charts. And it's much more about my community and giving something to the community. However, it's impossible to have a project like a podcast without hosting it and being, in essence, the sort of like the leader of the project or the star of the show, and that type of thing. So there is a core of that kind of essence in what I'm doing. And the other thing about these axes, just like the ascendant and descendant, the MCIC axis, if any planet activates this axis by transiting or in natal position, if you've got something sitting on your IC, it immediately works with activating both ends of that axis. So if you've got Mercury on your IC, your midheaven, your MC, is also going to work with Mercury in opposition. So the IC will have Mercury in conjunction, and the MC will have Mercury in opposition. Somebody who has that exactly, my mum, who has Mercury on her IC, comes from a family of 5. She's one of 5 daughters, and her family life is hugely. She's a Virgo, by the way, my mum. So Mercury is very important. So her family life is absolutely hugely important to her. And her sisters she has a friendly relationship with her sisters, and quite close, but it means she's very mercurial at her core, probably because she came from such a hugely such a large family of girls, and it's very diverse. Each of them is very different. They've all had families of their own. My mum is kind of the person that connects everybody, brings them all together. She uses social media to communicate between them all. But when she would go out into work, she would use those skills, those communication skills, in her profession as well. So it's highlighted Mercury for her, which is an important planet, being her ruling planet, the ruler of her sun. And it really magnifies for my mum the importance of family life and the importance of that kind of mercurial sibling quality, which, by the way, Mercury and usually the third house is sibling orientated in many ways. You know, it's where we first learn to develop our communication skills and our social skills and our individuality and understand our difference from other people. So remember that when you're looking at somebody's chart, if you see on the IC or the MC that there's a planet there that's just hovering around, then it's a very important one. Somebody else who's got planets up on the midheaven, around the midheaven, famous person, is Billie Eilish. And Billie Eilish, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head now, I've written about her and I've shared her chart so many times in this podcast. But Billie has got, not too far, I think in her 9th house, she has got Venus and Pluto up there. And I think her sun's on the midheaven. I think Billie Eilish has sun in Sagittarius, midheaven in Sagittarius. It's very close. You can give it 8 degrees usually either side. You know, if any planet that's up there, quite close to the midheaven, about 8 degrees either side. If it's the sun, you could give it 10 degrees. It's quite a, you know, the sun it illuminates everything. You know, that also adds quite an important, you know, it's anyone with sun on the midheaven is going to be very public in a way. They might be an introvert. They might not particularly like to be in the spotlight, but they might find themselves in the spotlight. Karen Carpenter, of the Carpenters, I'm just making notes of who I mention at the moment. I can't remember her chart off by heart, other than I know she has the sun on the midheaven. And she was the drummer of the Carpenters and somehow ended up getting thrust to the front of the band because she did have just a lovely, beautiful voice. And she ended up suffering with difficulties with her self-image, and it became a very public thing that she had anorexia and unfortunately died an untimely death. And there's so many things that you could go into about Karen Carpenter, but you know, ultimately she you know, she was somebody who had sun on the midheaven, and she was kind of like a reluctant sun on the midheaven type of person. So again, like I was talking about the IC, anybody with planets on the midheaven, those are very prominently placed, hugely. And usually this indicates with the midheaven, opposite the kind of the homely aspects of the 4th house and IC, we then move into the midheaven, which is where we look at our role models, who we aspire to be, and really what we aspire to do. So the people that we look up to. Think about the people that you look up to. I think I mentioned this previously, but someone said to me, think of someone you admire, somebody that you look up to. Think about, list 3 qualities that you really admire about them, and you know, take your time to do it. And once you've got those 3 things listed, I really want you guys to do this actually, because I think it's so interesting. I know who I picked. I know what I admired about them, and when they said at the end, I can't remember where I heard this from, but at the end when they said all of the qualities that you've listed, and I hope you are listing or at least thinking of 3 things that you admire about somebody that you look up to. Those qualities are things that you possess in yourself. You are capable of, or you already do these things and don't even realise. I think for me, my things that I looked up to were like work ethic, you know, the focus, the determination, these sorts of things. And then I kind of realised, oh, actually, it's true. I do have some of those qualities myself. So the 10th house and the midheaven really are kind of where we go out into the world with the experiences and the groundwork that we've developed through our past and growing up, and then have, depending on the type of upbringing we've had and the type of nourishment we've had as children, go out into the world and strike out on our own. And whether or not we are prepared to take risks, whether we want something that's safe and reliable, you know, or whether we need to have the confidence in order to do this. The story is in the MCIC axis. The story will also be in the MCIC axis, whether or not you've come from a tough upbringing, where you've had a lot of expectation placed on you. What are you hearing there? Quite possibly Saturn in the fourth house or on the IC, and then going out in the world and actually using this heavy expectation and hard work in order to, take on much more responsible roles. Some people shy away, obviously. Everybody's different in the way that they deal with having pressure when they're younger, but a lot of people who have heavy expectation do follow in the footsteps of what their parents want them to do. So you can usually see what the hopes the parents have for the children through the MCIC axis as well. Now, just to run through a little list of bullet points I've got here. We have, to start with, the MC and the IC really looks, if you want to imagine, it looks like a tree. And as we know with trees, you've got the trunk that's visible and the branches above ground. But what's below ground is the roots, which almost look exactly like the branches that reach out up towards the sun. And this is a really good image to kind of work with when you're thinking about the MCIC, because the IC is the root. It is where we have planted our roots. It's where we settle and where we are nourished from within, from the earliest points of our life where we couldn't nourish ourselves and had to depend on somebody to do it for us. You know, all of us alive today, whether or not we've had a good past or not, whether or not we've had the nourishment we need or not, we are here right now. So we had a form of nourishment, whether it was a good source of nourishment where we were, put on prioritized above everything else and were given the best start in life, or those people that really had a lot of heavy setbacks, whether it was down to difficulties through the connection with bonding with the parents, or whether it was through a loss at a very young age. All of this kind of thing can affect us on our root level, on our IC, and obviously the IC and the MC being connected, it depends on what type of tree is going to grow up towards the sun. And that's exactly what happens as we go up and past the horizon and reach up, right up into the sky, with the branches reaching out and all the twigs and the leaves photosynthesizing and drinking up the sunlight. We are aspiring to go out into the world and grow as tall as we can and reach towards, as far towards that light source. And that's exactly what we do on our journey. As human beings, we have our ascendant, which is kind of how we see the world and how we kind of approach the world, what we go out and, how we interact with our environment. We've got our moon, which is our personal, most private nature, where we, we have our habits, and the moon indicates our kind of connection with the past, and also our most, I suppose, the way that we nourish ourselves, how we feel safe and connected and accepted, and a sense of belonging. But ultimately, we are all growing towards our sun. Now, even if you had your sun on the IC or on the descendant, that's fine. It tells you which area of life you're going to be focused on in growing towards. However, our midheaven is where the branches reach up, because the midheaven indicates that light source of which we all grow towards, and it tells us who we aspire to, who our role models are, who made us feel able to do what we do or unable to do what we do, and ultimately it's an image of kind of our true kind of ambitions, drives, and hopes for ourselves. So it's a really, really important axis, and it plays in with the fourth house being about home and family and connection and belonging. Very lunar qualities, but like I said, you could have, like me, Leo on the fourth house cusp. You could have, or on the IC, I should say anyway. You could have Aries on the IC, where you could come from a very competitive family, who encouraged independence, a family who loves sports. Or maybe you've got Virgo on the IC and the fourth house, which can be about coming from a place where a critical home life, where everything had a place and everything had to be exactly where it was. And the funny thing is, using the equal house system, I have got Leo on the IC, but I also have on my 4th house cusp, I have Virgo. And my mum is a Virgo, as I've previously mentioned. And when I was growing up, I could not tidy up because if I tidied up, I would be told, "Oh, you've moved something. It shouldn't be there. You shouldn't touch my stuff. You know, you've ruined my system," or that kind of thing. You know, where's this? Where's that? And I'd be, "Oh, I'm sorry, I just moved it. I tidied it." And I'm quite a tidy person. And so I don't tidy, and then I get told off for not tidying, and your mess is everywhere, and this, that, and the other. And my mess never usually was all over the place. It was usually my mum's mess. Gosh, she's going to hate me for this. Actually, my mum is a Virgo. Just because they like to have order and organisation, it doesn't mean they're tidy. It's like a sense of kind of knowing that they've got stuff lying around, and it's always projects, got to tidy this, got to sort that, got to organise this. So usually it can be boxes full of stuff that has to be gone through. The Virgo enjoys that aspect, or perhaps doesn't necessarily enjoy it, but just feels a sense of that they have to do it. Whereas, so there could be boxes full of rubbish and you think it's just a load of mess and what's that all about? Don't move that box. The Virgo knows about it. It's there for a reason. So me having Virgo on my 4th house cusp, I remember thinking, oh gosh, when I get a place of my own, I definitely want it to be nice and tidy. I'm a bit minimalist. I try to be. I don't like to have too much clutter. And now I've got my own place. I've got my own home. I've got my cats. I've got my partner. It took me a while to realise that suddenly I turned into a very critical person at home. I like to have things tidy. I like it to be exactly as it is. It took me a while to realise, oh my gosh, I am my mother. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because, like I said, my mum has got Mercury on her IC. She's a Virgo sun. I have a Gemini ascendant, making Mercury a very important planet in my chart, and Mercury rules my 4th house cusp and also my 1st house cusp. Of course I'm going to be a critical, mercurial Gemini/Virgo type. Virgo at home and Gemini when you meet me out and about. So it's interesting to see what sign you've got, depending on which house system you use. So if you use equal, you're going to have a floating MCIC axis, and all the house divisions are going to be equal, but you're going to have like a placement for the midheaven, which confuses some people, and I won't go into too much detail about that now. However, it does add extra context when you're using an equal house system as to the placement of the MCIC in the equal house divisions. So for me, I have my MC placed in Aquarius in the 8th house using equal house system. And I also have on my 10th house cusp, I have Pisces on my 10th house cusp. So I have that kind of duality where I can read into 2 different placements for my midheaven, or for like the 10th house cusp being career points. However, if you're using a Placidus house division system, Regiomontanus, Campanus, all these different ones, even I guess whole sign, you're going to have, I don't know about whole sign actually, scrap that. But yeah, you're going to have on your 10th house cusp is going to be literally the midheaven. So it depends on what you're looking at. Like I said, I spoke to Wade Caves about this, and I do have an interview with him where he really goes into detail about that kind of thing. So it's very interesting. But the houses are something that you should definitely explore for yourself and decide what you like. I use equal mostly because it's what I was raised on, basically. And I think it's very, very, very old house system as well. I think going back, way back to Babylonian times, I think that's the house system that they use. So I always thought, well, why not? So either way, digressing, do have a look at your chart. And if you're using an equal house system where you have a floating MCIC axis and you also have a 10th house cusp, which signs are on those? Where is your midheaven? And what is on your 10th house cusp and your 4th house cusp? Have a look at that. Have a think about your home life. Have a think about yourself at work. How do your colleagues perceive you? And what do you aspire to? Think about your home life. What's on your 4th house cusp? Like I said, if it's Virgo, did you come from a critical upbringing? Did you come from a place where maybe there's always lots of mess to be sorting out? The Virgo Pisces polarity is about order and chaos being the Piscean branch of that. So think about the kind of the polarities as well that you might be having and how they play out through your MC, IC, or your 4th and 10th house. But ultimately, for all of us, the points that I was going to go through earlier, if we think about now, planting a tree on top of our chart, the roots being firmly down on the IC and sort of like down by the 4th house, and reaching out and up onto the MC, where they're reaching the light for the external light source and nourishment, not the nourishment that we receive from the ground, from our roots, from the soil, which we soak up, and it creates that strong and stable trunk from which we can grow upwards and onwards into our future and become a grand old oak tree at some point in our lives and drop acorns of our own and hope that they find root in their local surroundings and also take root and reach up and carry a little bit of our message on with them, which, if you can imagine that kind of heritage, there's a sense of carrying forward and laying your own roots, or perhaps planting a seed of your own. The seed is really where the IC is really where the seed has been planted. But actually, we have to think about the MC and the IC as well. If the ascendant is the eastern horizon where the sun rises, and the descendant is the western horizon where the sun sets, we also have a sense of north and south about the MC-IC. Now, depending where you are in the world, this could be it could vary. So in the northern hemisphere, where I know I've got listeners all over the place. So I've got listeners in Australia and Brazil and Argentina and Chile and South Africa, all over the place. Basically, this is where it gets a little bit confusing. So the midheaven in the northern hemisphere is actually south. And if you think about it, for anybody who lives in the northern hemisphere, anybody who lives in the UK, for example, when you're buying a house and you're looking for the best position to have the garden, a south-facing garden is what you want, because you get the most sunlight. Because as the sun moves across the sky, it moves in a southerly. It's in a southerly direction, whereas if you were in the southern hemisphere, the sun would be north. So just to throw you all there a little bit and confuse you. However, just from a northern hemisphere perspective, the midheaven is the south point and the IC is the north point. So that's quite an interesting one to wrap your brain round. But think of it as a north and south anyway. We've got east and west and we've got north and south. So we have this sense of a compass about the birth chart, as well as it being a big clock, the midheaven being kind of like the 12 o'clock position and the IC being the 6 o'clock position. Like I said, it's also the mother and the father. Now, the mother being where we do get our nourishment, whether we're breastfed or whether we were given formula, whether we had a wet nurse rather than our mum feeding us. Regardless, the type of nourishment we get, the kind of, the initial start in life is connected very much to the mother's role, which is why it's a bit confusing to think that maybe the 4th house and the IC could be connected to the father rather than the mother. However, some say that when we look at the MC, the midheaven, being connected to the mother, which I've always found actually in a quite a strong way, that it does resonate with the mother whenever I've done readings with people, that actually the mum is kind of, and I suppose depends on whether you're male or female as well, it depends, but the mother tends to be what we look up to. She is what we look up to initially. So the MC does connect it. Whether the 10th house is kind of I do see the 10th house sometimes as like the authority, the person who goes out and comes back and has a presence in the outside world, and the mother is kind of like the stay-at-home person who's always there, usually. So the 10th house can be connected to this kind of authority, outside world of work, our aspirations, and career. All of those things are kind of wrapped up in the 10th house. And the 4th house, again, like I said, it's home life and everything. So this kind of parental axis, usually MC being mother and IC being father, kind of it flips. It can flip and it can be confusing. But yeah, generally MC tends to be mum and IC tends to be dad. And if you do have a transit to the MC as well, like particularly if you've got like Mars or something. I remember seeing a friend of mine and she just had Mars over her MC, and I said, your relations might be a bit heated with your mum at the moment. She went, we just had a massive row last night. And it's just like one of those things that you can sometimes see. But actually the mother in the initial upbringing and obviously the housing and gestating of the embryo until it's fully grown and birthed is a very connected relationship. And even though the initial, period of, being nursed from being newborn into being, a toddler and a little bit more, it's very maternal focused. And that can be seen as a much more active role in the parental relationship with the child, being that the MC is the more active and obvious position, whereas the paternal role could be the more subconscious background, doing all the little jobs that the mother doesn't have the time to do. So I'm not saying that dads aren't involved, but it may be not such an obvious involvement to the child or baby's experience. So that could be partially part of the reason why. If you've got your own ideas about this, I'd love to hear them. It's always very interesting to gather people's ideas, and I can suggest and bring them up on other shows. And share what you think personally. But yeah, do get in touch. Stephanie at stelliumastrology.com, and that's Stefanie at stelliumastrology.com. And so we've got that mother and father thing and the parental archetypes, the types of relationship we have with our parents, and it's the past and future as well, the IC being the past and the MC being the future. And then we've got home versus the outside world, which I discussed. Somebody who has a lot of planets around the fourth house and the IC may struggle. It may be that family life has a great pull, but it can drive you. It can really drive you, that can. Like I said, these axes don't work independently, they work together. So if you've got a lot of stuff going on in your fourth house, a friend of mine, she's got I can't remember if she's got 2 or 3 planets in her fourth house, but home life is a huge feature for her. She's got a family of her own, but in order to give everything she can to her family, she's out there working. She's got a Capricorn moon in the fourth house. She's out there working all the time to provide what she can for her family. It's like I said, these things don't work independently. They do work together. We can also look at the relationship between the classic rulers of the fourth, those that have that relationship. So Cancer and the moon being the fourth house kind of domain, and Capricorn and Saturn being the 10th house domain. And that is a very moon versus Saturn relationship. And the moon and Saturn have a very interesting relationship in many ways. The progressed lunar cycle takes about 27 years. So your moon will go about 2.5 years per sign by progression, which is a type of a predictive method in astrology. So if your progressed moon spends about 2.5 years per sign and reaches a progressed lunar return at about the age of 27. And there's a connection between that, and some say there's a connection between that and the 27 Club, the people that died at 27, having done their first progressed lunar cycle, and having gained enough experience of each sign of the zodiac over those 27 years that they have got such a rich and developed sense of their initial journey that they are ready to leave for whatever reason. And Saturn in turn also takes about 27 to 29 years, it sort of depends, about that time to go around the whole zodiac as well. He spends about 2.5 years per sign, goes retrograde here and there as well, so sometimes it's a bit more in one sign. And we have a coming of age transit at that age when we have our Saturn return. So the progressed lunar return and the progressed Saturn and the Saturn return are both very prominent and interesting times to explore in our own natal chart. And they are very much connected to that duality, that polarity, that opposition that I talk about, where the chart works in such a multifaceted way. So the Saturn being the domain and Capricorn, like I said, you don't have to have Capricorn. If you've got Aries rising and like your chart's pretty, like it just seems to be almost exactly how the chart would look if you had Aries rising and you actually had Capricorn on the MC. Yes, fine, that's going to make great sense to you. But it might be that you have on your midheaven, you might have Taurus on the midheaven, for example. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have career aspirations. It just means that what you do is going to be Taurian in the approach. It's how other people are going to perceive you. The midheaven is also about your public image and your reputation. I talked about Billie Eilish having a Saturn transit over her Sagittarius stellium and her midheaven, and during that time she worked really, really, really hard, and she had that's when she started getting signed and having her recording contract and all that kind of thing. So it's a very interesting it's a very interesting point of the chart to watch. It's also a very obvious and out there one. So if you're trying to figure out what a planet means to you, have a look when it goes across your midheaven. Have a look when it goes across your ascendant. It's those points that you can really connect. So yes, I'm not saying that you don't have those kind of aspirations, career aspirations, in a way that we associate with that kind of ambitious quality of Capricorn. It's just that there's an essence. It's almost like Saturn is the person who lives in that house. The Capricorn quality is kind of how he runs his household. And so that house, it's like going around to somebody's house, and if you've ever gone to someone's house and they just do things so differently to you and you think, gosh, I couldn't live here, it's just very odd. But actually, when you've got a different sign on the cusp of the house, so say you've got Taurus on the cusp of your 10th house, then you are going to your career is going to be reflective of that Taurian quality. It's likely you're going to be known for building something, like really establishing something, getting tangible results, maybe doing something arty and creative. I think I met a girl who earned a lot of money, and she had sun and moon in Taurus, new moon she was born on, in the 10th house. Career was very important. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. She was very focused. She was very committed, all very Taurian qualities. And when I went round to her house to see what her house looked like, imagine now it would be Scorpio is the opposite sign to Taurus, and that would be on the 4th house cusp, or the IC. And her house wasn't like a big gothic scorpionic cave. She had a beautiful place to live, but her artwork, her Taurian sort of qualities, her sun and her moon, really reflected through the way she decorated. She painted, and she had lots of pets, and it was a very beautiful place to live as well. I'd say that the Scorpio qualities that came out for her would probably be that she was quite an extreme. She liked to drink and to party, and it was literally all or nothing. It was never really a quiet night. And she has battled with a lot of health issues and difficulties which have taken her to the brink of life and death. So that kind of phoenix quality of resurrection and rebirth, with Scorpio being on the root of her chart, means that she probably has quite a familiarity with those kind of experiences, and quite possibly she might come from a family life where she struggled with privacy, secrets, and therefore keeps herself quite private and guarded in her personal relationships. So it's like I said, it's a seesaw. Now we also have who we are and who we aspire to be, as I mentioned. So think about the people that you really look up to, the kind of role models. Think about the qualities they possess and whether or not you actually agree that part of those qualities are things that you contain in yourself. The roots versus the branches, and earth versus water. So there's that kind of quality about it as well. I know I could have gone into so much more, and I'll there's so much to say about each of them. But it's something to just kind of immerse your thoughts into when you're thinking about the MCIC, and when you're thinking about the 4th and 10th house, and when you think about career and aspirations, and when you're going out into the world and things like that. Where are the environments in which you do these kinds of things? And where is it you're aiming towards, and who do you use as a role model to think, well, if they can do it, I can do it too, and I know how they're doing it, so I'm going to try and model myself on what they do. And what is it that you look up to in people, and how is it you're perceived as well? Do you have a reputation for anything? Are you seen as somebody who is hardworking, or somebody who is intelligent, does something that's quite complex, quite conceptual? The planets that you have hovering around your midheaven can be quite telling. If you don't have any planets hovering around your midheaven, what is the ruler of your midheaven? What is the ruler of your 10th house cusp? Have a look at those planetary placements. Where are they? What are they doing? Myself as an example, I have I've got Aquarius ruling my midheaven, so therefore Uranus is a significator. I have Uranus in Sagittarius in the 6th house, and I also have Saturn, if we're going to go by traditional, Saturn in Scorpio in the 5th house. So for me, I have to go deep. I have to do something mysterious. I have to do something a little bit occult. But that Uranus in Sagittarius is about having kind of like a unconventional belief system, maybe. Maybe not necessarily even a belief system, but just, a sense of meaning that is going to be different, something that brings different type of meaning into my life. So that's my kind of Uranus and Saturn being the significators of my midheaven and where they're placed in the chart. So the 5th house being about making it fun and enjoyable and a little bit of performance, maybe doing something that puts me out there. I guess a podcast would count, wouldn't it? And also, that Uranus in the 6th house, it has to be on my terms. I can't do things in a routine. It has to be as and when I can do it. Pay attention to that sort of thing. And I did pick out a chart to talk about today. I picked out Ludmilla, who Ludmilla is from São José, or São José, in Brazil. 23rd of January 1990, Saojose is the location, and 2340, so that's 11:40 p.m. So she was born quite close to midnight, and it's no surprise to see that she has her sun in Aquarius at 3 degrees, sitting right at the bottom of the chart. Let's see, where's the midheaven? So the 4th house cusp, using equal house, the 4th house cusp is 13 degrees Capricorn and 17 minutes of arc. So her sun is not quite on the IC, but it's close. And the midheaven is the 10th house cusp is at 13 Cancer, which is directly opposite the 4th house cusp. But she's got her midheaven is floating at 8 degrees Cancer in the 9th house. So that gives us a sort of like a secondary indication of what she'd be up to career-wise. But what drew me to this chart was just the amount of planets that happen to be sitting down there on the around the 4th house. Like she's actually got Mars in Sag, 26 Sag, and then Moon, Uranus, and so Mars in Sag at 26 degrees of Sagittarius, obviously, and that's in the 3rd house. And then there's a series of other planets in the 3rd house as well. We've got Moon 1 degree Capricorn, Uranus at 7 degrees Capricorn, Mercury at 10 degrees Capricorn, Neptune at 12 degrees Capricorn, Saturn at 18 degrees Capricorn, Venus at 25. Oh my gosh, what a stellium. And then 3 degree Aquarius sun sitting there in the 4th house as well. So the planets that shift into the 4th, I believe, are not Neptune, Saturn, Venus, and the Sun. They all sit in the 4th. So there is an emphasis on family life. And as I previously mentioned, Saturn in the 4th house, or around the sort of MCIC axis, can be a kind of a heavy expectation. There can be a home life which is quite strict. There can be rules, there can be traditions that must be observed. There's Neptune down there as well. So like I said, there can be a lack of being able to connect with that family life in some way. Or it could be that, possibly maybe being a bit of the black sheep, doing things a bit differently because you don't really get the rules and the regulations. Or it could be that you have to make a lot of sacrifices of who you truly are in order to fit into your family. And then you've got Uranus and Mercury. Now, Uranus is almost exactly bang on the IC. So this is a really, for you, this really describes a sense of maybe disconnection or possibly even a rejection of that kind of family ideal. It may be that you had to upset a lot of people to pursue what you really wanted to do. And for you, if we're going to shift up and have a little look up at your midheaven in Cancer, you've got Jupiter not too far away and you've got Chiron on the midheaven too. How funny, I was talking about Chiron and Jupiter in Cancer earlier on, and now you've got this placement on your midheaven. Now, this is somebody who probably works with people who require a lot of healing in some way. And, the things that you can go out and help people with are possibly the things that you weren't able to heal about your own past. So thinking about this heavy stellium, which, like I said, if you're having some slices of pizza, the amount of toppings she's got on this slice, spicy, unusual flavours that are difficult to digest, quite possibly may even bring out an allergy or an intolerance in you, happen to be sitting right at the bottom of the chart, creating a very, very interesting and involved home life. Lots of different experiences which have shaped you at your very core. And it may be that you don't fit in to your family. It may be that you struggle with your home life a bit. Your family relationships may be difficult. You may have unconventional sibling relationships. It might be that you with Capricorn, they don't tend to, you're an Aquarius, so obviously you're going to be different anyway. You're going to do things to the beat of your own drum. However, with all that Capricorn stuff, there is a feeling like you do want to do what's expected of you. You don't want to break away too much and cause too much disruption. However, the Aquarius sun is in conflict with that. But this conflict could very well be expressed through the career. And it could be that, like say if you were in the caring profession, for example, that Cancerian need to go out and care for others. The kind of care you offer and the kind of advice you can give and the understanding that you can offer, which helps people to feel accepted, will actually be reflective of some of the challenges that you've experienced through your family life, through your home life. And, you've got Jupiter up there as well, which really gives a sense of doing something meaningful with your career. You absolutely have to do something meaningful. Jupiter can represent politics. It can represent doing something spiritual or religious with what you do. Travel can be indicated. Being in the 9th house as well, I'd say that perhaps higher education is something you wanted, whether or not you were able to do it. A sense of higher education, whether it was getting a degree or whether you travelled abroad and did yoga teacher training, for example, and doing something that really expanded your skill set and gave you the ability to connect with your own personal truth, is very much brought into the importance of your career point here. Chiron on the midheaven, just like I was saying, Chiron in the 7th house doesn't condemn you. Chiron on the midheaven doesn't condemn you. You may have had some adverse, challenges in your life that you had to work through. It may be that you've worked with people who haven't necessarily reflected your true worth to you, and you've had to fight for recognition in what you do, or at least fight for some kind of fair treatment in what you do. However, I think that the root of your tree, which is so saturated with planets, and that Aquarius sun, which is very unique and does things their own way, is born to break a family pattern here. I think you were born to do things differently and to prove to your family that you can do what you want to do and lead by example of your own example of doing things your own way. And to top that off as well, with Jupiter up there in Cancer, I really get a sense that you find a sense of belonging through what it is that you do. So your 10th house cusp is Cancer, your midheaven, your floating axis happens to be slightly in the 9th house, which gives us that 9th house sense of searching for meaning and searching for experiences and, doing things that are, expanding the mind and expanding the consciousness in different ways. But with Jupiter there too, it echoes that 9th house need to do something that really matters. And I think that you really find a sense of belonging through what you do, through your career choice. It really gives you a sense of maybe you really found your family through your shared interests with the people that you work with. Maybe you have, I don't know why, but maybe I'm seeing like a community or something that you're involved with. And the community that you're involved with feels more like a family than maybe your family does. It does feel like there's a bit of a seesaw here because Jupiter is opposite your moon. So Jupiter in Cancer opposite your moon in Capricorn, it's almost like there's a kind of seesaw of home and away, and having to kind of balance the family expectations while still going out and exercising your individuality and freedom. And it can be a painful experience because not everybody in the family would understand that, why you need to do that, but ultimately it's what you need to do. So thank you to Ludmilla. I hope you can feed back to me at some point and let me know whether or not that resonated with you. As previously mentioned, I've got the Patreon page if you want to check that out, guys. Also, anybody who is signing up for my newsletter to subscribe and submit your chart to the podcast, which you can do if you want to put your chart on the show, I will get round to doing it. All you need to do is submit your chart. What you need to do is sign up to the mailing list, which is on my website, stelliumastrology.com. It'll be in the menu. It says subscribe, I think, in the menu. And all you need to do is, once you've signed up to the mailing list, you should get an email, a welcome email, with a link for you to sign up. Check your spam folder. It's really important because sometimes my emails do land in the spam folder. So definitely check that out. I think that's kind of it. If you're enjoying the show, take your phone out your pocket, give me a review, subscribe on iTunes, and rate me, and other people can find me. I don't get reviews all the time, but I always love it when I do. You can contact me and say hi. But I just thought I'd close this episode on a few phrases which I think reflect the 4th house and the 10th house. So we've got, no tree, it is said, can reach to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. That's by Carl Jung, and very, very evocative of the sense of the depths in which our true roots really reach, and really how high we aspire to reach as well. Here's another one. Our heroes reflect a projection of our deepest selves. So actually, what I was saying about the, what we admire in others are actually qualities that we admire in ourselves. And that was Kilroy J. Oldster from the Dead Toad Scrolls. And here's another one. Character is like a tree and reputation like a shadow. The shadow is what we think of it. The tree is the real thing. And that was Abraham Lincoln. Another great sort of 10th, 4th MCIC phrase, quote, thing to sort of ponder, because the MCIC is very important. There's a great book, by the way, guys, if you want to get it, I'll put a link for it for you. It's The Midheaven by Frank C. Clifford. Also, The Contemporary Astrologer's Handbook, Getting to the Heart of Your Chart, are great books. There are links in the blog post that I'm going to provide for this episode with all the links to the books for you. The Houses, I think, is by Sue Tompkin. No, by Howard Susportus. But there's a load of books that I've got links to for you so that you can research and explore for yourselves. I hope you found it useful. Yet again, it's been fun. And I'll speak to you next time, guys. We're going to be moving on to the 11th house, the 5th house and the 11th house. Okay, guys, take care. Speak to you later.